I'm Chris Sims from ComicsAlliance.com. This is Here's the Thing, and it is officially too hot to wear a cardigan. This week we have a question. Jocelyn? Jocelyn? Do we have the question for this week? Oh, thank you. We have a question from @FrankieMon on Twitter, who would like to know, what's the big deal about Mark Waid's 90s Flash run? I don't know if I like your tone, young man. It seems awfully sarcastic. The big deal. Well, let me tell you something. Mark Waid's Flash run in the 90s was a big deal. But to understand why, you really have to go back a long way, which is the way things tend to work with comic books, so bear with me for a second. Flash has historically been probably the third most important comic at DC. The first two, of course, being Superman and Batman. Once you get past those two, Flash is there at the key moments of every phase of DC's existence. When you talk about the Golden Age, you've got, obviously Action Comics #1 is what kicks it off, and you get Detective Comics and Superman and Batman and the Justice Society. All that comes together. And it's worth noting that the Justice Society was formed largely because of all these non-Superman and Batman characters that were really popular, including Flash and the original Green Lantern, the Spectre, characters like that came together. But when you go to the Silver Age, and DC really gets going in 1954, what's the book that launches it? It's Flash. Well, it's Showcase #4, but it's Barry Allen as the Silver Age Flash that launches DC in the Silver Age. When you get to the Modern Age, or the Bronze Age, a lot of the stuff that happens to define the feeling of the Bronze Age, which you get in Green Lantern, Green Arrow, notably with the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams stories. Also, you get in Flash under Cary Bates. Cary Bates on Flash and Cary Bates on Superman, along with Elliot S. Maggin and Kurt Swan and a lot of the big creators of the sort of mid-70s to 80s, they kind of crystallized the feeling of DC. Now, obviously, a lot of that came from Kirby when he comes over in 71 and he does New Gods and Jimmy Olsen and all that stuff. That's the end of the Silver Age for DC Comics. But the feeling that you get from the Kirby books was sort of very Kirby. It's very definitely a Jack Kirby comic. It's a Jack Kirby sort of feeling. It's the same sort of feeling that you get from the 60s Kirby stuff, like Fantastic Four at Marvel. Or that you get even when he goes back to Marvel in 75, 76 and does Captain America and Devil Dinosaur and Black Panther and all that. What Bates and Denny O'Neil, Jim Shooter, guys like that were doing in the 70s was synthesizing the feeling of the DC Universe with that Kirby modernization. And they did it really well. Unfortunately for Flash, Flash kind of got into this weird rut because Bates, I believe, was writing and editing it at the same time. So there was no real check on that. So you get the trial of the Flash that lasts forever. It legit goes for like 2 years. It's a storyline that goes for 2 years about Flash being put on trial for a time travel murder. Because comics, But what happens is the Flash gets canceled because people were done at that point. They didn't want any more of that. So you get Crisis on Infinite Earths that kind of ushers in what I still think of as the modern age DC universe, even though it's 30 years old, because I'm old, and that's the DC universe I grew up with, but that, 80s, 90s DC universe, the Crisis on Infinite Earths ushers that in, and one of the key moments of that is Barry Allen dying. And metaphorically, that makes a lot of sense, because Barry Allen was the character who ushered in the Silver Age. Barry Allen was the character who ushered in the concept of the multiple Earths. It's not the Justice Society returning in Justice League that creates Earth 1 and Earth 2. It's Flash and Golden Age Flash teaming up in that famous, I'm Government cover. So Flash being an iconic character of that era, of the 1954 to 1986 era, really makes a lot of sense to have him die in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So Flash is there at the beginning and end of that universe, and at the ushering in of the new universe. Now, at the same time, even today, what was the cause of the New 52? It was Flash. Flashpoint was a Flash crossover. It was a Flash event. So even today, you have Flash at the center of this DC universe, even though the big, the big stars of Superman and Batman, they're not going anywhere. But the thing about Superman and Batman, and the idea that they're not going anywhere, means that you're limited in what you can do with them. Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent are always going to be Superman and Batman. You're going to get some minor changes that don't last, that shake things up. And you have Superman dying and being replaced by the four Supermen, the reign of Superman. You have Batman dying in Final Crisis and being replaced by Dick Grayson, who also replaced him after Nightfall. But that's not really going to last. That's never going to last. And it's because Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne, those two characters at the core of Superman and Batman, they're too ingrained into the DC universe. For some reason, Flash isn't. And I think it's because Flash was the first character to be replaced. So that 1954 Dawn of the Silver Age with Barry Allen really changes things for the DC universe. It shows you who can stick around and who can't. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, they never go away. There's an Earth 1 and an Earth 2 Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but there's no break in the comics. There's no, Detective Comics is in continuous publication from 1930. Well, I guess Batman shows up in 1939, so he's in that comic from 39 to today, even though they renumbered it in 2011. There's no break in Detective Comics. There's no break in action. There's no break in Superman. There's not really a break in Wonder Woman, because if there is, then they lose the trademark, so they kind of have to keep that one around. But Flash, Green Lantern, those characters can be replaced. And we know that because they were. And they were for a long time. And even when they were set back, they weren't set back to the original versions. We didn't get the Flash Rebirth and Green Lantern Rebirth weren't about Alan Scott and Jay Garrick coming back. They were about Hal Jordan and Barry Allen. So even those characters that were replaced aren't going back to the original versions. They're going back to the replacements. Now, this might seem like I'm going off on a tangent, but this is all very important for understanding why Mark Waid's run on Flash with Greg LaRocque, with the late, great Michael Ringo, were so important. Because Flash, through that series of events that starts in 1954, or even starts earlier with the formation of the Justice Society, Flash forms the anchor of the DC universe. He's there. The Flash is always there. And that creates the idea of legacy. Now, legacy is something that DC Comics as a whole has ignored in recent years in favor of the New 52 reboot. Which is fine, whatever. But the 90s DC universe, the post-crisis DC universe, I guess I should say, the one that exists from 86 to 2005-ish, or if you really want to stretch it, it's 86 to 2011. That universe is built on the idea of legacy, because they make the choice in 86 of folding everything into a single universe. See, before that, there was Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth X, all that. But what really mattered was that there was Earth 1 and Earth 2. There were these two primary DC universes. And there were major characters that existed in both. There was an Earth 1 Batman and Earth 2 Batman. There was an Earth 1 Wonder Woman, Earth 2 Wonder Woman. There was an Earth 1 Superman, Earth 2 Superman. And they were the same people. It wasn't like a Jay Garrick, Barry Allen, or an Alan Scott, Hal Jordan situation. It was Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne. So that they could have Superman be a young and vital 29-year-old guy, and Batman could be 29. That's the kind of Julie Schwartz, Mort Weisinger age of those characters. But also keep trading on the fact that these were comics that had started in 1938. When they fold it all in the wake of Crisis, they say, okay, there's just going to be one DC universe. There's going to be one continuous DC universe. And they have to do a lot of scrambling to figure out how that's going to work. Because do you want to have a Superman who shows up in 1938 and invents the superhero? I mean, of course you do, because that's your big guy. You can trade on the idea that you have the first superhero. You have the first and greatest superhero. But the problem is you still want him to be young and relatable. You want him to be, a vital character. You don't want 80-year-old Superman running around. So they err on the side of keeping their characters young and relatable. They err on the side of Superman shows up 10 years ago. Batman shows up 10 years ago. We're going to show you their origins. You get Man of Steel, you get year one. But all of the characters who didn't have direct counterparts in Earth 1 become the Justice Society. And the idea is that there is a heroic age that starts in World War II. That starts in 1938. And so you get the Golden Age characters existed. And then there were no superheroes for a while. And then Superman shows up and kicks off this new heroic age. This new dawn of heroism. This current modern dawn of heroism. That's all started by Superman. But there's still a legacy that goes back. 10 years ago, people were like, man, whatever happened to the Justice Society? Whatever happened to these superheroes we used to have? We don't have those anymore in this modern, cynical world. And then 10 years ago, you start hearing about this guy in Metropolis who can fly. You start hearing about this weirdo in Gotham City who dresses like a bat and fights murder clowns. So the idea of legacy is still there. And creators like Mark Waid and Grant Morrison played around with that a lot. There's one really cool scene in JLA where Aztec joins the JLA, and they have a ceremony where they go into this dark candlelit room, and they kind of, he takes, there's that old Batman scene where Batman makes Dick Grayson swear the oath by candlelight to make war on all criminals. It's like that, but instead of any of the trappings of the modern superhero, they have the Crimson Avenger's costume. The Crimson Avenger being the first masked superhero who showed up. Predates Batman. So, you have this whole idea of legacy. And that idea of legacy was what the DC Universe was built on. The idea that there were heroic traditions. The idea that people had to live up to stuff. And there was inspiration that starts in the 30s and continues today. And that all shows up in Flash. And it shows up better in Flash than it shows up anywhere else, to be honest with you. There's bits and pieces that show up here and there, but Flash is where it really comes together. Now, the interesting thing about Flash is that Waid doesn't just stop with Jay Garrick. He doesn't just stop with Jay Garrick and Barry Allen and Wally West. He goes in both directions. Max Mercury shows up in Flash as the Zen Master of Speed. That's kind of his catchphrase. Max Mercury was a character who had nothing to do with Flash. He was just a guy who ran fast. He was just another superhero who had the very obvious power of running really fast. But he didn't stop there either. He goes into the future. You get John Fox. You get this evidence that the Flash legacy continues in the future. That there's always been a Flash, and there will always be a Flash. That this is something that sits at the core of this universe. That it's a necessary thing. Now, all that is metaphorically why these books are so good. In practice, they're good because they're really good comics. They're good because Waid is one of the most gifted writers in superhero comics. I've made the joke before that guy is so experienced at this point that he can write a great comic in his sleep. And I don't think that's false. I think if you woke Mark Waid up from a sound sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're like, hey Mark, what should Superman be doing this month? I think he could do it. I think he could sit up, dictate 22 pages to you, and go back to sleep. So, you get the idea of legacy, but you also get the idea of things continuing in other ways, which really makes for a great superheroic drama. It makes that soap opera work. You've got the Rogues, who are these, all of Barry Allen's villains who kind of continue. And they form this interesting relationship with Wally West, because he's this kid that's grown up around them. It's interesting to note that the Rogues don't really hate the Flash, that they kind of have an affection for him, which is really interesting, because, Lex Luthor has no affection for Superman. Batman's enemies, generally speaking, once you get past Talia and Catwoman, and Joker, I guess, if you really want to get into the metaphorical ideas of the characters, but Batman's villains want to kill him. Batman's villains exist to kill Batman. Lex Luthor exists to kill Superman if he can. Flash's villains just kind of want to rob banks. They don't really want to kill the Flash. That's not what they're in it for. So you have this kind of friendship that develops between the villains. You have villains who go straight, that last for a really long time. You have the Trickster joins the FBI as a former supervillain, a guy who understands the supervillain mindset. You have Pied Piper. And you get the reveal that Pied Piper is gay, which was kind of a big deal in the 90s because he wasn't revealed as gay as a villain. He was revealed as gay as a guy who, you know, was reformed and was trying to make up for his past. And it adds like a layer of complexity to his character. So you get all that, and you also get new villains. You get Savitar, who a lot of people don't talk about Savitar. Savitar never really gets mentioned. Savitar's awesome. He's in Dead Heat here. Really good. But the most important story in Mark Waid's Flash, and the one that you really ought to read if you want to understand everything that I'm talking about, is The Return of Barry Allen. Because The Return of Barry Allen is not The Return of Barry Allen. It's a trick. See, even in 87, 88, even when Crisis happens, everybody knows death is impermanent in comics. We'd already been through the Phoenix. We've already gotten that. So everybody knew it was only a matter of time before Barry Allen came back. The thing is, all the changes that happened in the DC Universe, whether they lasted or not, whether they were undone in recent years or not, they were all meant to be permanent. Barry Allen was meant to never come back as the Flash. Hal Jordan was never meant to come back as Green Lantern. Although what happened with Hal Jordan is a topic for a completely different time. So if you want to hear about that, just let Jocelyn know. You know, Tim Drake was meant to be the new Robin. Dick Grayson was never gonna go back. Jason Todd was never supposed to come back to life. All these changes were meant to be permanent and give at least an illusion of change. So that idea, that editorial idea, was at odds with the fan idea of all this stuff is nothing's permanent. Nothing ever really changes. The only constant is change. Herodotus. So they did Return of Barry Allen. And the idea here was, oh yeah, we're going to bring back Barry Allen. That's how they promoted it. They called it The Return of Barry Allen. It's right there on the cover. But they don't return Barry Allen. They make you think they're going to return Barry Allen. And even better, they make you think they're going to return Barry Allen as a villain. Because what happens in this is Barry Allen comes back, and then, you know, and there's a couple issues of everybody being happy about it. There's a couple issues of Jay Garrick, Wally West, Barry Allen team-ups, where you have 3 generations of the Flash, all teaming up together. Everything's going to be great. Uncle Barry's back. It's going to be awesome. And then it all kind of goes wrong. It all kind of goes bad for Wally West. And it flirts with the idea of, oh, you want Barry back? Okay, well, here's Barry back as a villain. Now, again, this is actually what they did with Green Lantern when they brought Hal Jordan back as Parallax. And then went and made him the Spectre, and then he came back as a guy who had a giant yellow space bug living in his head. But that's beside the point. Then it turns out to be a story that's not about Barry Allen coming back. It's about that Flash legacy. It's about what it means to be these characters that have this tradition of heroism, that last this long, that go through these long, epic sagas of what it means to be a hero and what it means to have villains in a way that other comics can't really do, because you're never going to replace Bruce Wayne. You're never going to replace Clark Kent. You're going to replace them briefly, but it's not going to stick. In Flash, it sticks until it doesn't. But for a long time, for about 100 issues, Mark Waid stays on Flash, and it really defines his career. It's an amazing book. It's a truly phenomenal comic, and you can see everything that he's done works so well there. And it's important to note that he works with amazing artists. We talked about Greg LaRocque a second ago, who draws Return of Barry Allen, but there's also Mike Ringo on a lot of this stuff, who is phenomenal and who would rejoin Waid to do Fantastic Four. And there's also Humberto Ramos, who introduced Impulse and kicked off Impulse, which, if you go back to the very first episode of Here's the Thing, is the source of my favorite single issue of all time. So I have a lot of love for Mark Waid's Flash. Now, I mentioned Morrison earlier as well, because the idea of Legacy and Flash really forms the foundation that Morrison's JLA is built on. It's worth noting that Mark Waid also does JLA Year 1, which goes back and retcons the origin of the JLA, and sticks with it as much as he can, but also, you know, filters things out, makes it so that Superman wasn't there at the beginning, swaps out Wonder Woman for Black Canary, gives Black Canary that root in the Justice League. There's this weird time where Waid and Morrison switch off. Waid writes a couple arcs of Justice League, or JLA, and Morrison and Mark Miller write a couple issues of The Flash. And these are great, by the way. They're phenomenal. Emergency Stop is really good, but the human race is essentially the Flash racing against Sonic the Hedgehog for the fate of the universe. And that's pretty good. So, in addition to being the kind of cornerstone of this universe, you also get really, really great character-driven stories. Really, really great stories about people connecting and the ideas of heroism. That's what makes Mark Waid's Flash, Mark Waid, Greg LaRocque, Michael Ringo's Flash, so great. Because it takes everything about the universe that it's in and celebrates it and makes it work really well. And that's why books like JLA worked. That's why books like JSA worked. Because they were all playing off that same idea. They were all in sync. They figured out what the core of the DC universe should be. This idea of heroic legacies. This idea that, these are heroes that have been around a long time. This is a universe that has celebrated heroes since 1938. And they ran with it. And they made some great comics. So that's all we've got for this week on Here's the Thing. If you've got a question that you'd like to see me tackle in a future episode, then just leave a comment at comicsalliance.com under this video, or hit me up on Twitter, twitter.com/theisb, THEISB. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week with another show. Have a good one.